Well, I'm happy to welcome back to the day Dr. John Campbell. He is an independent health analyst and has a healthy following on social media where he offers insights into the pandemic. He joins me tonight from Carlisle in the UK. Dr. Campbell, it's good to see you again. Let me start by getting your reaction to today's death toll in the UK.
Well, of course, it's a very sad milestone, isn't it? I mean, to be fair, we had been expecting this for some time. The trajectory has been up for about 12 days now that the UK has been higher than most of the European deaths. And as well, the lockdown in the UK is somewhat behind that of Italy and Spain and France, for example. So it was inevitable it was going to carry on rising for a period of time. But of course, it's still very sad to reach these milestones.
The UK Foreign Minister, Dominic Raab, said today, and I'm quoting him here, he said, there are different ways of counting deaths. We now publish data that includes all deaths in all settings, and not all countries do that. And of course, he was referring to Italy there. Is he speaking the language of science and statistics, or more the parlance of politicians? What do you think?
One of the sad reflections about this in Europe is it's been a bit of a competition. We're doing better than you, or you're doing better than us, or we're not as bad as that guy over there, which is a bit of a pity because there's human beings at the end of this. Mm-hmm. But having said that, the testing strategy, not the testing strategy, that's been bad in the UK, but the recording strategy in the UK is very good. The Office for National Statistics does count this very meticulously, and this data is really quite accurate for deaths registered up till the 24th of April. Now, Dominic Raab is right. There are different ways of accounting for deaths in different countries, and it's difficult to know what to include. So, for example, in the UK at the moment, we are including deaths at home, nursing homes, deaths in hospitals, and suspected deaths. Now, suspected deaths mean where COVID-19 or coronavirus is actually mentioned on the death certificate. But even when you take that into account, the overall amount of deaths is much higher for this particular week than it would be normally. Even if you account for the COVID-19 deaths, there's still an excess of deaths. So it actually looks like the real number of deaths attributable to COVID-19 is somewhat higher than the official figure would suggest at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. You mentioned comparisons here in Europe. We began this program talking about the parallels of the UK and the United States in this pandemic. From where you are, looking across the pond and looking at your own backyard, how do you explain both countries leading the world when we talk about mortality in this pandemic?
I think there are two different modalities of action here, really. The response in the United States has been really quite disparate. Different states have kind of gone their own way. And I think it was only when they had the wake-up call from Washington State and Seattle and from the high numbers of cases in New York that the United States really became aware of the scale of what was going on. And even then, the response was somewhat disparate, and quite often people weren't cooperating with it in the US, with the lockdown. Whereas in the UK, the cooperation with the lockdown has been basically good. But we did start somewhat late. The testing has been very poor in the UK and is still it's still not really going that well at the moment. We're still not reaching our quota of tests. We had a lot of cases to begin with because of sort of international connectivity with London as well. And then there was this idea that the government had in the beginning where they were going to go for herd immunity, with this idea where we would contain and then move on to the delay stage, where I think they took their eye off the ball really and weren't looking for the individual cases anymore. They were sort of assuming the virus was there, when actually you've got to chase every single case. We have to test. We have to trace and treat and isolate every single case to get on top of this pandemic.
I want to ask you about a story that just came across this evening. Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College, he is a leading UK modeler. He has resigned from the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies after admitting that he made an error in judgment. He violated social distancing by allowing a woman to visit him twice during the lockdown. As a medical professional, Dr. Campbell, how important is it that people such as Professor Ferguson practice what they preach?
Of course, it's absolutely imperative, and we saw this with the senior medical advisor in Scotland as well. We can never say, do as I say, don't do as I do. We must always say, do as I do, follow in my footsteps. Now, Neil Ferguson, to be fair, had had COVID-19 and had tested positive for it. So his thinking was that he was immune. But of course, that's a rationalization. These rules are for everyone because we don't know, apart from anything else, just how immune people are once they've had the disease. So he clearly broke the rules and is unfortunately had to pay the price for that. And it's a great pity because Neil Ferguson is perhaps one of the leading, well, certainly one of the leading epidemiological mathematical modelers in the world. So even though he's not officially part of the SAGE group anymore, the Scientific Group for Emergencies, I certainly hope the government's going to be drawing on his expertise. And certainly his department has played an invaluable role in the UK response to this pandemic. So I hope he hasn't gone away altogether, but certainly a major indiscretion.
Yeah, and we've had people from his department on this show talking about the models, as you say, very, very important. When you look at everything that's happened, Dr. Campbell, bringing us to where we are right now, do you see the UK learning from these initial mistakes? I mean, is there a positive view that can be found moving forward?
I think very much so, because understanding the deaths is a very important statistic, because that helps us to understand how many cases there were a few weeks ago. Because what happens with this virus is, of course, someone becomes exposed to the virus, then they have a period of incubation, perhaps 6 or 7 days. Then they have day one when they have their first symptoms. Then they have a symptomatic period. And then very often the deterioration takes place in the second week, and death might not occur till the third or fourth week after that. So we've got this long lag and this long delay. And the big hope in the UK at the moment is the total number of deaths have gone down. Now, it's concerning that the number of deaths in nursing homes has continued to rise, but the number of deaths in the community and the number of deaths in hospitals has gone down. And that indicates that the rate of infection has been falling now for some weeks. So that is promising and just does show that the lockdown strategy, for which we're now in the 7th week, is being effective and that we need to carry on with it. But we so desperately need this individual testing, tracking, tracing, isolating strategy to run in tandem with that, because that's our only way out of the lockdown until we get therapeutics and until we get a vaccine.
Yeah, and let's hope that in the future we can spend more time talking about those lives saved instead of those lives lost.
Absolutely.
Dr. John Campbell,
which
as always,
are many, certainly are.
Certainly there are many, that's true. We shouldn't forget that. Dr. Campbell, as always, it's good to get your insights. We appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Night, Brett. Thanks.